Welcome to Inside Politics with Kevin Klein, Jeff Courier, and Royce Coop, where we break down the stories shaping our country.
Welcome to another edition of Inside Politics. I'm Kevin Klein, joined by two of my colleagues from the Winnipeg Sun. We have Jeff Courier and Royce Coop. Royce, who is also a professor of political sciences at the University of Manitoba. A couple of topics we want to talk about: the Manitoba deficit-bound budget. As well, let's start with the fact that a federal election is going to be called. This is being taped on Friday. The election will probably be called on Sunday. We don't know what date yet. But I saw a poll that came out today that is very interesting, especially here in Winnipeg, that the Liberals will now walk away with almost every seat in Winnipeg. We have to talk about that, gentlemen. What happened?
Well, we've talked about this before, but the two most unpopular features of the federal Liberal Party were Justin Trudeau and the carbon tax. And that's what Pierre Poilievre has been hanging his hat on those two hooks for the last few years. Now, those arrows have been taken out of his quiver. Now, Royce, I'll get you to comment on this, but it's curious to see how the Liberals have spiked in the polls, not just here, but right across the country. So what this tells us then is that Canadians would like to have 4 more years of what they've had for the last 9 years.
It's with these polls, you always have to say they're like a snapshot in time. You know, people could vote today. How would they vote? I wasn't really sure that Carney was going to dive into an election campaign right away. With polls like this, we know he will. They're like wrapping the Liberal bus apparently, but this really is his best shot. Things are not going to get any better than this. So we're definitely going to go into an election campaign. Jeff is right. You know, the exit of Justin Trudeau gave a big boost. Carney does have some credentials, and we know in some polls that Canadians do have some trust of him when it comes to dealing with Donald Trump, and dealing with this issue. And if he can cruise on that for the next 3 or 4 weeks into a re-elected Liberal government, that would be a coup. I'm not sure it's going to happen, but it would be something.
I'm not ready to call Carney a savior for the Liberal Party. I understand that you're right. I think, Jeff, you were right. He's taken some wind out of the Poilievre sails, especially all of his platform. He announced he was going to take GST off homes for new home buyers the other day, Carney. So, I mean, he's taken another platform topic away from Poilievre. I look at the poll. And I wanted to, take myself back to statistics in school. And when you look at it, it's not necessarily a huge decline for the Conservatives. More so, the rise of the Liberals is at the entire decimation of the NDP. I mean, this is going to be an election where people say to sing goodbye. You failed this country. You are responsible, probably more so than Trudeau, for the last 9 years for propping them up. And I think that that's what we're seeing right now, is a whole ton of NDP support that just can't bring themselves to support the Conservatives for whatever reason, and they're putting it all behind the Liberals.
Yeah. Jagmeet Singh's days as a party leader are numbered. His popularity and his productivity has declined with each successive election. And again, as Roy says, these polls are snapshots. But if the quote, if the election were held today, the NDP would get blown out of the water. Now, these guys have to get out on the campaign trail. They've got to get out in front of Canadians and sell themselves. Now, whether or not Mark Carney can do that, I don't know. I know that the Canadian media has generally been much kinder to Mark Carney than the British media. If you were to read some British media accounts, he was not very well thought of there in a lot of quarters. So he's going to have to get out there and deliver the goods. But so far, he's done all of the right things. He's made all the right announcements. He's skated with the Edmonton Oilers to look good there. You know, the photo ops are good. And as I say, you say I'm going to get rid of the carbon tax. This is where it gets really misleading. He says, I'm going to get rid of the consumer portion of the carbon tax. That doesn't mean that we're going to be free of the carbon tax, because if industry still has to pay the carbon tax, who do you think is going to pay for that? The consumer is, of course.
So, and who gave him that idea, Jeff? That was Wab Kinew.
Well, okay. And the other thing here now is when you get out into the campaign trail, if you're a Liberal incumbent and you have to knock doors, 2 months ago you were in favor of the carbon tax. Now you're not. If some Liberal candidate, if some Liberal incumbent knocks on my door, I'm going to be poking him with a pretty sharp stick over that one.
Right, but this goes back to, and Royce, you and I have talked about this before, and we've talked about it on this program, Inside Politics. What is wrong with the Canadians' memory? What's wrong with our memory? The last 9 years have devastated this country. We do not have an armed forces. We cannot protect our borders, and here we are going, "Hey, the Liberals can do it now." What's going on?
Canadian politics is very leader-centered. It always has been. And I think the Carney is at a high watermark. It's really the case he's inexperienced. I've said that lots of times on this show. He's going to have to go through a very intense, very bruising election campaign. And what we've seen from Carney, I kind of feel like the more I see of him, I agree with Jeff. Like, I think the photo ops have been good, but when he's actually unscripted, when he's answering questions, when he's getting pushed even just a tiny little bit by journalists, he doesn't actually do that well. He doesn't respond well. He doesn't have the kind of little skills that politicians have that they learn on the job, that they learn while they're in the trenches. And so, this all kind of reminds me of the 1993 election. Kim Campbell came in. She was really popular for a little while. Look what happened to her. It's completely blown out of the water. The party never recovered from that. And she had a heck of a lot more experience than Mark Carney has. First prime minister in Canadian history with no elected experience whatsoever. I'd be nervous if I know they're feeling great right now, you Liberals, but I would be nervous about going to an election campaign with him as leader.
Well, you know what? I go back. I think there's a lot of Canadians that are sitting there saying they want somebody who doesn't have any political experience. They want somebody who has a business background. They want somebody who has a different background, and maybe Carney gives them that. I think it's ridiculous to see the change in the polls. I really can't. I don't know how you justify these. I don't know how you quantify them. It's just, to me, it doesn't make any sense. I want to switch off from that because we're going to be talking about this election, I think, for the next month at least on this program. But let's talk about what's happening in Manitoba, because there's a big supporter of Mark Carney as Wob Canoe. And we know that. We know Wobbs likes Mark Carney. He was the one that brought forward the consumer hidden carbon tax, if you will, to have it hidden instead of having it front and center for people not to like. He just put out a budget that in all essence, to me, puts this province in a $2 billion deficit position, all in the name of Donald Trump, which is what this election's going to be about. This election's going to be about Donald Trump. And here we are. We're just going to put this province and probably the rest of this country into a debt position that we just cannot maintain. And they're bragging about it as a Trump-proof budget. Trump doesn't care about Manitoba.
Well, no, but I mean, every province has to do what it has to do, Kevin. And when you talk about a $2 billion deficit, that's contingent on the tariff war going on for an extended period of time. Having said that, the original, if it doesn't go on for a long period of time, the deficit is still significant. It's like $795 million, something like that. The biggest thing, and it's going to be a little bit murky for people to wrap their heads around, the basic personal exemption, basic personal allowance or exemption, the basic personal exemption, and indexing is frozen in Manitoba. Mm-hmm. This essentially means that every Manitoban has just received a tax increase.
Yep.
And when you're not indexing things, when you hold that BPA, it's a tax hike for everybody in Manitoba. There's almost no tax relief in this budget. There's little dribs and drabs here and there. But this budget does not make Manitoba in any way more competitive with anybody. Just as an example, the basic personal allowance here, which is the threshold at which we begin to pay provincial income tax, and that's what it is over $3,600 higher lower in Manitoba than it is in Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan's BPA is over $19,000. Ours is over $15,000. Like, there's a $3,600 difference. We're not even competitive with Saskatchewan in our tax structure. And this budget is doing nothing to help that. Great is saying, okay, we're going to freeze hydro rates for a year. Well, what do you think is going to happen next year?
Yeah, it's all going
Yeah,
to go up. And before we get into Royce, I want to bring up this point because you had said, well, that's only if the tariffs go on. I've spent time in government, Jeff. I'm going to tell you the fact that they've got in there the $1.9 billion deficit, whether the tariffs go on or not, that money's going to get spent because the budget's going to get passed and that money is in the coffers now. They can use it for whatever they want, right? So I don't buy the excuse of Wob Canoe or any of them saying if the tariffs don't go on, we're gonna cut back. No, you're not. You have the money, you're going to get it passed, and you're going to spend it. Sorry, Royce. I just had to say that because I'm so tired of politicians playing the spin. It gets passed, they have the money, they will spend it.
yeah. It's a problem with Canadian politics and with Manitoba politics that politicians have gotten much more accepting of running deficits in situations where they shouldn't be. You should maintain the capacity so that you can run deficits when you actually need to. If you need to build because the whole world economy is melting down in 2008, then do that. But then when you're in a good economic situation, then you kind of have to pay the debt down. That's how this works. But in Manitoba, if it doesn't snow enough in the wintertime, it's like, oh, now we have to run a deficit because the hydro didn't make enough money. So yeah, there's a bigger problem here in both Canada and Manitoba. And I think one thing that hasn't been talked enough about is that even if this budget, it has some relief, some tax relief, it doesn't really have tax cuts. There's taxes going up in other places. In Winnipeg, city taxes, some of the school districts are posting massive tax increase. How is some people are not going to be able to afford to own a home in this city pretty soon. I think there was one, it was East St. Paul is posting a 25% increase for those taxes. So, we have to keep in mind the bigger picture here. If taxes are going up in other levels, then people are going to be paying more, even if the NDP, or sorry, even if the provincial government isn't raising taxes a huge amount in their budget.
Oh, and the provincial government, of course, opened the door for these school divisions to allow for those increases. The previous government had frozen that, but now these school divisions are taking full advantage. So you're talking about like a 9.4% hike in some of the Winnipeg school division. I think it's like a 9.4 increase. And as I've written in the Sun for this week, wouldn't it be nice if our kids' math scores went up by 9.4%? But they're not. We're paying more and getting lousier results. Only New Brunswick spends more per student than the province of Manitoba. So when the superintendents start telling you we need to fund our schools, you already are funded well. You're just not delivering the results. And so that's a problem. But to Royce's point, it is true. It makes homeownership far more difficult when property taxes, and by the way, Winnipeg already pays among the highest property taxes of any city in Canada. And so we're already getting stuck, and we're getting hammered this year with a massive property tax increase. So affordability should have been one of the key features of this budget, and it wasn't addressed at all. Next door in Saskatchewan, they're going to run a very small, but it is a surplus. Now, having said, the caveat to that is that they haven't built in a contingency fund for a long tariff war, which all other provinces seem to have done. Scott Moe hasn't done that in Saskatchewan, but they're forecasting it about a balance or a small surplus. Where here in Manitoba, it is just spend, let's have debt, let's build a new emergency room at the Victoria Hospital. You don't need a new emergency room there. You need emergency room physicians to staff the place.
Yeah.
That's the problem with the Vic.
Yeah.
It's not the room. It's the fact that there's nobody behind there looking at patients.
It's all the Wizard of Oz. Don't look behind the curtain. Don't look behind the curtain. And not only are you got both, you're right. I mean, we're getting school boards that are increasing taxes. We've got basically the income tax, massive increase of an income tax by the NDP government. Winnipeg, though, is adding a water fee now, a new water fee. They're also going to be adding, garbage removal fees that used to be part of your property tax. Now it's going to be separate from your property tax. It never ends. And really, one of the things that disappointed me in the budgets for both the city and actually for all three, city, school boards, and the provinces, no one talked about cutting anywhere. No one talked about cutting fat anywhere. I've been going on my soapbox about that long enough. Nobody seems to be pushing politicians to start cutting spending. We seem to all be okay with taking a deficit. However, in Nova Scotia, I'll note that they're taking on a deficit, but they said they're going to take a whole whack of money, millions and millions, to start getting minerals out of the ground and fast track that. So we know there's 34 minerals that are the most desired minerals in the world right now. They're worth hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. And I think Nova Scotia has 19 of them in the ground, and they're aggressively going to take money, take on debt to get those minerals out of the ground. In Manitoba, we have 28 of the 34 most desirable minerals in the ground. Not one mention of that in the budget. Not one effort made to streamline it and say, start digging and start mining tomorrow. That could represent over $1 trillion to the Manitoba economy, and not one word. So I don't want to hear from any NDP member. I don't even want to hear from the Conservatives, who are supposed to be the official opposition, who haven't said a word about that they know how to run an economy, because they don't. If they had, I would have accepted a $2 billion deficit if it was all going to get minerals out of the ground, because that would protect our future. But they didn't do it.
Yeah, they want to build, build, build. Well, there's things that you can build that are going to have long-term positive consequences for the province, and that kind of exploration is going to make a big difference. I'd like to see more of it. The reason people are so accepting of deficits and the reason that politicians can get away with it is because people haven't been through a real debt financing crisis in this country. We haven't really seen that since since the 1990s, when Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin were making real cuts to the federal government, cutting transfers to the provinces. Once you've kind of been through that, you've had that experience, program cuts to or layoffs, then you kind of know, oh, this is the kind of medium-term consequence of running deficits every year when it's not necessary to do so. We're probably heading for that.
We are for sure. I can tell you that as per the federal government's fall economic statement, which was released in December, that the federal government's own projections have, by the end of this decade, the interest on Canada's debt, just the interest payments every year, will be about $70 billion. That's what we'll be paying just to service our debt by the end of this decade. $70 billion every year for nothing.
Bye-bye healthcare.
Well, and you guys are the only ones that are talking about this, but I think that in a few years, of all the crazy things Justin Trudeau did, this is going to be the thing that we're talking about, the legacy of fiscal irresponsibility. We're going to go through this period because of these big deficits from his time.
Royce, your unborn grandchildren are going to be paying off the debt that this government's racked up.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you both this. Are we the next Greece then?
If we keep on doing what we're doing.
I mean, think about it. We're no different. If you look at when was that collapse in Greece, in the early 2000s? I think it was around the early 2000s. Are we not walking down the same path that they had to walk down? I mean, low productivity, they were borrowing money like they were, sailors on leave, and it seemed ridiculous. And it seems like that's what we're doing now. Let's remember, folks, as you're pushing up Carney and the Liberals in the polls, this Liberal NDP coalition took on more debt than any other government or prime minister in the history of Canada combined. So this isn't a one-off, oh, they were the highest, yeah, but economic times. No. All the Canadian debt was more, they took on more debt than Canada had. So are we heading down the path of Greece?
It's interesting to think about.
It might be a little extreme. Sorry, Royce, go ahead.
No, I to say it'd be interesting to see what that looks like, because of course we all talk about Canadian sovereignty now, including people that didn't seem too concerned not that long ago. Now they're massive Canadian patriots. Well, what's the best way to guarantee Canadian sovereignty is to make sure that we're not in a very vulnerable situation in the future where our debt is getting downgraded, and we might be vulnerable to American attempts to intervene in our economy as a result of that, to keep ourselves in good financial shape, in addition to maintain our infrastructure, create the ability to actually export our products to markets other than the United States. That's how we maintain our sovereignty.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, because I think you nailed it when you said, that opens us up for the US to walk in and save us, right? They have to come in and they have to take Canada out of debt. All of a sudden, we're knocking on the door of the U.S. saying, "Hey, we need your help. We don't have any money left. Do you mind coming and helping us?" I want to wrap up here in a couple of minutes, but I want to spend some time because we're talking, obviously, this is inside politics. In Manitoba, the race is still on for the leadership of the Progressive Conservative Party. We talked last time about a new party, and we had invited both candidates on for a debate. Abi Khan refused, said he didn't want to do that. But then we find out that Royce, our very own Royce Coop, was called to the debate that happened the other day here in Manitoba. I will tell you that some of the feedback I got was nobody was impressed. There wasn't a very big crowd, and online it was the online stream was awful. I got to be honest. I don't know why they had so many technical problems, but I didn't see any more than 51 or 52 people watching at any given time. But you were there, Royce. You were asking the questions. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first debate that they had in Brandon, it was very adversarial. They were attacking each other a lot. In this debate, that was less the case. It's actually Wally said he likes Avi. They get along. He has respect for him, and there wasn't a whole lot of that. There was a little bit of it, but there was much more focus on substance, on the issues, and I thought it was good. It maybe wasn't as good television. We like to see the fighting, the brawling. It wasn't as good television as the first debate, but I think in terms of learning about the candidates, in terms of seeing them, talking about their leadership style, that seeing what they're like in these situations, it was good. These technical issues, yeah, that's kind of too bad because nowadays you want to make sure that the widest audience possible can actually watch. But yeah, in terms of the candidates, I thought it was interesting, it was insightful.
It may seem like a small thing that they had some glitches with the feed, but people will vote for the people who look like pros. Right? If you look like pros, you're going to win.
Yeah. Confidence.
And just for example, the Jean Chrétien liberals, they just look like pros compared to the other guys. When Stephen Harper came along, those guys just looked like pros compared to the people running against them. And if you can't pull off a simple thing like a YouTube feed or an audio feed or a visual feed, you just don't look like you got your stuff together.
Yeah, I mean the party is at a low point right now. And so, after they lost the Tuxedo by-election, they lost in Transcona as well.
Bad.
Yeah, we can talk about that if you want to, but yeah, the next election is what 3 years away. A lot of times the parties go into the opposition, they don't learn anything. They're just like, we'll win next time. Sometimes it's not a bad thing for a party to lose, to have to get its nose bloodied, and to kind of think about, okay, what improvements do we need to make? How do we need to update the organization? What do we need to think about? So it's not always the worst thing to go through tough waters, and I think that's what the PC party is going through right now.
Okay, so let's talk about the number of memberships. We're hearing that it's a little less than 11,000 or around the 11,000 mark of memberships sold. That doesn't get the party even close to getting out of debt. In fact, I don't even know if that pays for a leadership campaign.
Oh no, we've talked about this before. When a party is in the position that the provincial PCs are in, it's hard to raise money, and a lot of the people who maybe live in the city who might ordinarily have thought, well, here's my $20, I'll put it in. But nobody wants to be seen or feel like they're throwing good money after bad. And I think a lot of people seem to be holding off and waiting to see, okay, who's the leader going to be? And what kind of leader is that person going to be? Are we going to have a sniff in the next election? Are we going to see our numbers come up? Because I don't want to just throw my money into a losing pot.
Yeah, the party is really kind of in a holding pattern right now. Until you get your leadership sorted out, leadership it's always been so important in Canada, in politics. And so once they figure that out, a lot of these things are going to become more clear moving forward.
So let me ask you both this. Let's wrap up on this. We're going to be heading into a Canadian election. We've all talked about what's happened over the last 9 years, what some of the issues are facing us going forward. If you had 30 seconds to talk to a voter, what would you tell them?
I'd ask them on based on what are you going to cast your vote in the next election? I'd be curious to find out. Is it that Mark Carney's not Justin Trudeau and that's enough? That's all it takes? Has Pierre Poilievre done anything for you? Or was he just a default because you didn't happen to like Justin Trudeau anymore? On what basis are people going to cast their votes?
Royce,
Yeah.
as a professor,
Right.
what would you tell people to consider going into this election?
I'd ask them, has the Liberal government earned your vote? You look at the last 9 years, have they earned your vote? I mean, what the Conservatives say about the kind of the lost decade, almost virtually no growth compared to almost every other democracy in the world in this country. We got to keep that in consideration. I mean, I don't ever want to tell people what to think or how to vote, but I mean, it doesn't really take that long to look at the evidence and say, I'm really not sure that the Liberals have earned the opportunity to serve in government again, especially when the government is 80% it's Trudeau era ministers are in the cabinet right now. Carney returned them. So I would encourage people, look at the record. There's going to be a lot of attention on Poilievre, but I would look at the Liberal record when deciding who to vote for.
Great, both of you, very good. My thing is pretty much a combination of you both. I think this is going to be a critical election. This is going to be critical to Canada's future. And I would tell every voter, do not walk into that ballot or that box until you're informed. Take the time, do some research. Research is a lot easier to do nowadays with the internet. Do some research and think about the future before you cast a vote. I think we're going to have lots to talk about as we move forward. Things are going to be coming up, and we'll talk about them more and more as they do pop up. I look forward to having those conversations. If you like the show, please follow us on our YouTube page and make sure you like and share this video. Gentlemen, thank you again. We'll talk next week.